This is something no one could have imagined. The Vatican, regarded as the holiest place on earth, a sanctuary of silence, order, and divine power, has lost its image as an impregnable fortress. From within the ancient walls of this city, information has leaked out, revealing a story never before known. One that not only erodes faith in the institution, but also forces the world to reconsider a church that has long been seen as strong and untouchable. When the details of what was truly happening behind those sacred walls spread, they quickly went global. And now these revelations are changing everything we thought we knew about the Vatican. A major crisis has erupted, shaking up all the perspectives and perceptions we once had about the church and its leaders. If you find this story interesting and want to learn more about these shocking revelations, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Don't forget to hit like and share this video with those around you. Leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting videos in the future. Now, let's dive into the story. The hidden scandals within the Vatican. Inside the sacred walls of Vatican City, a truth has existed throughout its long history. Nothing can be hidden forever. Since Pope Francis took office in March 2013, a series of shocking revelations have rocked the Catholic Church, exposing poor financial management, sexual abuse, and corruption at the highest levels of the Church's leadership. Perhaps the most significant financial scandal to emerge during Pope Francis's tenure involved Cardinal Angelo Betu, one of the most powerful figures at the Vatican. The scandal focused on a disastrous $400 million investment in luxury real estate in London, leading to a loss exceeding €100 million for the Vatican. This was not just an ordinary investment. These were funds from Peter's pence, donations from ordinary Catholics dedicated to charitable activities. Betu approved a €200 million investment with financier Raphael Mincione in 2014, who was accused of misusing these funds for other projects, causing a financial disaster. The investigation uncovered deeper corruption. Betu was accused of transferring €250,000 to his brother's cooperative in Sardinia, with Italian police finding fake receipts to conceal the paper trail. He also transferred another €575,000 to a self-proclaimed security advisor named Cecilia Morona, allegedly to negotiate the release of a kidnapped nun. But that money was spent on luxury handbags and stays at five-star hotels, a dark betrayal of the Church's mission to serve the poor. When confronted with these charges, Betu claimed his innocence and insisted that Pope Francis had approved the London real estate deal. The Pope not only denied these accusations, but also took the extraordinary step of disregarding the Vatican's state secrecy laws to allow testimony about their private conversations, a move virtually unheard of in church history. In an especially brazen move, Betu secretly recorded a phone call with Pope Francis while the Pope was recovering from colon surgery in 2021, violating both Vatican law and basic ethics. He also attempted to buy back the London property to block the investigation, an action Francis found highly suspicious. The trial that began in 2021 was a historic event. Cardinal Betu became the highest-ranking church official to face judgment by lay judges in Vatican's criminal court. In December 2023, he was found guilty of embezzlement and sentenced to 5.5 years in prison, marking the first time a cardinal was judged by lay judges at the Vatican Criminal Court. Although Betu maintains his innocence and is appealing the verdict, the case reveals the depth of financial corruption within the Vatican and Francis's determination to tackle this issue despite resistance. The Betu scandal emerged against the backdrop of long-standing financial issues at the Vatican. The Institute for Religious Works, commonly known as the Vatican Bank, has been notorious for decades. During World War II, the IOR was alleged to have received church taxes from the Nazis and was involved in hiding war spoils, with an estimated $1.7 billion in transactions just in 1943 alone. In 1982, the Vatican Bank was implicated in one of Italy's largest financial scandals when Banco Ambrosiano collapsed, leaving a $326 billion deficit. As the bank's largest shareholder, the Vatican paid a $244 million settlement while denying direct responsibility. Money laundering allegations continued for decades, with questionable transactions prompting an investigation by Italy's banking authorities in 2010 and causing J.P. Morgan to close an IOR account in 2012. The Vatican also faced allegations of tax evasion, accused of evading €4 billion in taxes on its vast holdings by exploiting a legal loophole. The European Court of Justice later ruled that this behavior was illegal, potentially exposing the Vatican to liability up to €13 billion. These financial scandals were further exposed in what insiders called VatiLeaks 2.0, a scandal that broke in 2015 when confidential documents were leaked to journalists. Two Italian journalists, Gianluigi Nuzzi and Emiliano Fittipaldi, published explosive books based on these documents. The merchants in Nuzzi's and Fittipaldi's temples detailed how Vatican officials mismanaged funds and resisted financial reforms. These revelations are particularly damaging because they come from within. Monsignor Lucio Vallejo Balda and Francesca Ciauchi, members of a papal commission established to propose financial reforms, were arrested for leaking documents. The Vatican's response was swift and severe. In a trial that attracted international attention, Balda was sentenced to 18 months in prison, while the journalists were acquitted on grounds of freedom of speech. This scandal exposed a bitter struggle that some Vatican observers describe as a battle between good and evil within the sacred halls of the Church's headquarters. Pope Francis, clearly shaken by these revelations, did something unusual for a pope. He issued a public apology. While financial scandals dominated the headlines, the most brutal controversies during Francis's papacy were related to sexual abuse. Perhaps nothing is more concerning than the case of Father Marco Rupnik, a world-famous Jesuit artist whose mosaics decorate churches worldwide, including those in the Vatican. Rupnik has been accused of sexual, psychological, and spiritual abuse of many women, mostly from the Loyola community in Slovenia. These allegations are heartbreaking. At least 9 women and 1 man have come forward with complaints dating back to the 1980s and 1990s. A former nun named Anna detailed 9 years of abuse, including manipulation and sexual acts that Rupnik described as spiritual expressions, telling her they represented the relationship between God and the Church. How the Church handled the case has raised serious questions. Rupnik was briefly expelled in 2019 for absolving an accomplice in a sexual crime, essentially granting religious absolution to a woman he had sexual relations with, a serious offense according to canon law. However, this expulsion order was lifted after just 2 weeks. Despite mounting allegations, Rupnik was still allowed to preach at the Roman Curia in 2020 and met Pope Francis in 2022, raising awareness of preferential treatment. Only after significant public pressure did the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, conduct a thorough investigation, discovering 15 highly credible allegations. Ultimately, Rupnik was expelled from the Jesuits in 2023 for refusing to comply with orders. Pope Francis, responding to growing criticism, lifted the statute of limitations in October 2023, allowing the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith to conduct a full investigation. As of 2025, the case is still ongoing, with new victims coming forward, the most recent in 2024. The Rupnik case illustrates what critics see as a pattern in the Church's response to abuse allegations. Initially reluctant to act decisively, followed by stronger measures only after public pressure. When asked about how the Church handles sexual abuse cases, Pope Francis acknowledged the scale of the issue while promising to continue acting. Unfortunately, the tragedy of these abuses is immense. And against this, a clear conscience not only refuses it, but sets conditions for it not to happen. You have said, no tolerance. It cannot be tolerated. In January 2025, Francis demonstrated this commitment by dissolving Sodalitium Christi Vitae SCV, a Catholic religious community based in Peru with around 20,000 members worldwide. Founded by Luis Fernando Figari in 1971, this group has been under tight scrutiny since 2017, when an investigation revealed that Figari and other members had abused 19 minors and 10 adults. Unlike similar cases like the Legionaries of Christ, which was only restructured under Pope Benedict XVI, despite widespread abuse allegations, Francis ordered the complete dissolution of SCV, essentially disbanding the entire organization. This unprecedented action demonstrates the willingness to take bold steps when necessary, although critics note that it came after years of allegations and investigations. Another controversy shaking the Vatican was the 2017 scandal involving the Pope's charity fund. This U.S.-based Catholic charity found itself at the center of a storm when Cardinal Donald Wuerl provided false information to secure a $25 million grant for a scandal-tainted hospital in Rome, the Institute Dermopatico d'Immacolata IDI. Vatican Foreign Minister Cardinal Pietro Parolin requested this funding on behalf of Pope Francis, but key details were overlooked. The hospital had gone bankrupt due to prior corruption scandals, and this grant essentially served to bail out the Vatican Bank, which had loaned the facility bad debt. When founding members discovered these deficiencies, many opposed, creating a rift that damaged the organization's reputation and raised questions about transparency at the highest levels of the Church. When Pope Francis began his papacy in 2013, he inherited what his autobiography, Sparer, Hope, later revealed as a large white document box from Benedict XVI, containing evidence of difficult and painful situations, abuse, corruption, and misconduct that his predecessor had begun to address. Benedict's farewell was ominous. "Everything is here. I've gone this far, taken these actions, removed these people. Now it's your turn." This symbolic passing of the torch, or more accurately, the handing over of a ticking time bomb, set the stage for Francis's turbulent papacy. The scandals that followed would test his reform agenda and sometimes threaten to overshadow his broader spiritual mission. In response to these challenges, Francis undertook significant reforms. In 2014, he established the Economic Council, appointing Cardinal George Pell as its first director, with the task of bringing transparency and accountability to the Vatican's finances. Francis also restructured the Vatican Bank, closing thousands of questionable accounts and instituting stricter anti-money laundering protocols. However, these reform efforts faced significant internal resistance. The 2015 VatiLeaks 2.0 scandal exposed the extent of this opposition when confidential documents were leaked to journalists Gianluigi Nuzzi and Emiliano Fittipaldi. Their subsequent books detailed how Vatican officials mismanaged funds and actively opposed financial reforms. Pope Francis's crusade against corruption and financial abuse came at a personal cost. As his health deteriorated in his later years, Francis continued to push for accountability despite his increasing physical frailty. However, his reforms and progressive approach would make him a powerful adversary both inside and outside the Church, laying the groundwork for unprecedented opposition to a sitting pope and creating divides that would persist after his death. Powerful forces against Pope Francis. As Pope Francis sought to reform Vatican finances and address the deeply rooted abuse issues of the Church, a strong alliance of critics emerged to oppose him. This opposition came not only from the expected groups, the conservative cardinals opposing change, but also from a diverse coalition of traditionalist Catholics, political figures, media celebrities, and even those involved in the very scandals he sought to resolve. Within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, several senior clerics became some of Francis's fiercest critics, often challenging his decisions on theology and administration through official channels. Cardinal Raymond Burke, an American known for his traditionalist views, emerged as a leading opponent, submitting formal questions, dubia, to Pope Francis in 2016 and 2023, seeking clarification on doctrines related to marriage, same-sex unions, and communion. These questions were not just academic but cleverly disguised challenges to Francis's authority and theological stance. Burke was not alone. Cardinal Walter Brandmüller of Germany joined him in questionable submissions, publicly criticizing Francis for organizing events that were said to limit open discussions among cardinals. Cardinal Robert Sarah of Guinea, another influential traditionalist, became part of the 2023 Dubia group and frequently expressed concerns about Francis's reforms, particularly regarding liturgical issues. These cardinals viewed Francis's more pastoral approach, especially regarding divorced and remarried Catholics receiving communion, as a dangerous departure from traditional doctrine that threatened the very foundation of Catholic teaching. The opposition has spread beyond the College of Cardinals to the broader theological community. In 2019, a group of 19 theologians, including the Venerable Dominican Father Aidan Nichols, signed an open letter addressed to bishops around the world, making the extraordinary accusation that Pope Francis had committed heresy according to canon law due to his teachings on marriage, sexuality, and grace. This unprecedented accusation against a sitting pope came after a correction by the children in 2017, signed by more than 60 priests and scholars, accusing Francis of maintaining 7 heretical positions, reflecting a level of open dissent previously unimaginable from a pope. Traditional Catholic groups have ramped up opposition to Francis's agenda. The Society of St. Pius X, SSPX, dense with members who had previously opposed the reforms of Vatican II, found Francis's continuation and expansion of these reforms particularly troubling. Although SSPX criticized the 2019 open letter accusing Francis of heresy as excessive, their broader critique of his papacy aligns with the concerns of traditionalists over doctrine and liturgy. Francis's 2021 restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass, as outlined in subsequent traditionalist declarations, continued to fuel opposition from these groups, who saw it as a direct attack on their liturgical heritage and an effort to suppress traditional expressions of Catholicism. Perhaps no critic has been more outspoken and controversial than Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who was previously the Vatican's ambassador to the United States. In 2018, Vigano released a shocking 11-page letter accusing Francis of knowing about the sexual abuse allegations against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and failing to act, dramatically calling for the Pope's resignation, an unprecedented demand from a former papal ambassador. After this initial barrage, Vigano went into hiding, claiming he feared for his safety and continued his attacks from an undisclosed location. Over time, Vigano's rhetoric became increasingly apocalyptic. He escalated his accusations, calling Francis a false prophet and a servant of Satan, while claiming the Pope was pushing a globalist agenda and actively undermining Catholic tradition. The Archbishop even went as far as to reject the legitimacy of the Second Vatican Council, positioning himself as a defender of a pre-Vatican church untainted by modernism. In 2024, Vigano's rebellion reached its inevitable conclusion when he was excommunicated for schism after refusing to recognize Francis's legitimacy as pope, marking one of the most severe religious penalties in recent Catholic history. Catholic media figures also played a significant role in amplifying the opposition to Francis. If you're surprised by this story and want to learn more, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below to let us know. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting videos in the future. Now, let's continue the story together. Michael Voris, the founder of the controversial church militant media platform, frequently criticized Francis for statements seen as challenging Catholic doctrine, such as his remarks on same-sex unions and economic justice. Voris's platform gained increasing influence among conservative Catholics, providing an unrelenting megaphone for dissenting voices and often portraying Francis as a threat to true Catholicism. The church militant's influence extended beyond traditional Catholic media, creating an emotional anti-Francis ecosystem that shaped perceptions, particularly in the United States. This influence continued until Voris himself experienced a dramatic downfall resigning in 2023 after violating the church militant's ethics clause, a fitting irony for someone who built his career criticizing others' moral failings. Opposition to Francis spread beyond the religious realm into mainstream politics, especially in the United States. Donald Trump and Francis had a famously tense relationship since 2016, when the Pope stated that Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric was un-Christian. Trump responded with an unprecedented fury directed at a religious leader, calling Francis shameful and implying that the Vatican would regret not having him as president to protect it from ISIS. These comments shocked many observers due to the disrespect shown toward a major religious figure. This discord wasn't just a personality conflict, but represented fundamental disagreements over immigration, economic justice, and environmental policy. The antagonism continued into Trump's second term, with him condemning Trump's mass deportation plans as an outrage and a major crisis in early 2025, just months before the Pope's death. Secular conservative commentators also contributed significantly to the anti-Francis narrative, bringing criticisms of the Pope to mainstream audiences beyond Catholic groups. Ross Douthat of the New York Times emerged as one of the most eloquent and influential critics, developing a comprehensive case against Francis in his 2018 book To Change the Church. Unlike the more inflammatory critics, Douthat presented his concerns in carefully considered intellectual terms, arguing that the Pope's reforms risked dividing the Church into irreconcilable factions. His criticisms focused on how Francis handled issues of marriage, divorce, and economics, suggesting that the Pope was weakening essential Catholic doctrines in pursuit of popularity and progressive approval. What has driven this fierce opposition to Pope Francis? The critics themselves have raised a variety of concerns, but several key themes have emerged, turning ordinary disagreement into unprecedented hostility toward a sitting pope. Theological disagreements form the core of much of the opposition. Critics argue that Francis's reforms, particularly allowing communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, as suggested in his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, have weakened traditional church teaching on marriage. They view his relatively welcoming approach to LGBTQ Catholics as a dangerous departure from the Church's teachings on sexuality, pointing to instances where Francis seemingly endorsed civil unions for same-sex couples as evidence of doctrinal confusion or willful undermining of Catholic doctrine. Cultural changes, particularly restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass, have alienated traditionalist Catholics who support pre-Vatican II practices. Francis's 2021 motu proprio reversed the more lenient approach of his predecessors, limiting where and when the old right-wing faction could celebrate Mass. For many traditionalists, this decision was not just a policy disagreement, but an attack on what they see as the most beautiful and authentic expressions of Catholic worship, sparking outrage beyond conventional ecclesiastical politics. Political stances on issues like immigration, climate change, and capitalism have led conservative politicians and commentators to distance themselves. Francis's 2015 Laudato Si encyclical calling for urgent action on climate change, along with his criticisms of unbridled capitalism and support for migrants, has put him at odds with right-wing politicians globally. His statement that building walls instead of bridges is not Christian was widely understood as a direct rebuke of Trump's border policies, bringing the Pope into partisan political debates in unprecedented ways. His handling of sexual abuse cases has drawn criticism across the political spectrum. Allegations that Francis mishandled specific cases, such as those involving McCarrick and Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, have raised doubts about his commitment to accountability, even as he took stronger actions later in his papacy. His initial dismissal of accusations against Barros as slander during his 2018 trip to Chile, only to later apologize and accept Barros's resignation, created an impression of inconsistency that damaged his credibility on abuse issues. The ambiguity seen in Francis's statements has made it difficult for critics who prefer the clear doctrinal statements of earlier popes. They accuse Francis of making ambiguous or contradictory statements that confuse the faithful, pointing to his famous comment, "Who am I to judge?" regarding gay clergy as an example of rhetoric that seems to undermine established doctrine while still maintaining plausible deniability regarding doctrinal changes. The intensity of this opposition has been amplified by the development of media platforms and social media, especially in the United States, where conservative Catholic networks have gained significant followings that previous generations could not have achieved. Traditional Catholic publications like National Catholic Register have increasingly aligned with Francis's critics, while newer digital platforms like Church Militant have reached millions of viewers with limited editorial oversight. The echo chamber effect of social media allows like-minded critics to reinforce each other's views, creating the impression of widespread opposition that may not be proportionate to the actual sentiment among ordinary Catholics. Pope Francis himself has acknowledged this organized criticism, describing conservative opponents as having a suicidal attitude for clinging to rigid ideologies rather than engaging with the modern world. When asked about his conservative critics, particularly in the U.S., Francis offered this assessment. "You use the adjective conservative. A conservative is someone who clings to something and does not want to look beyond it. That's a suicidal attitude because one thing is to consider tradition to understand the situations of the past, but another is to be trapped in a doctrinal box." Public reactions to Francis and the scandals surrounding his papacy have varied greatly within the Catholic perspective. On social media platforms like Reddit, users have expressed strong and diverse opinions reflecting the polarization within the Church. One user, JTAC33, wrote with clear frustration, "This is what confuses me. Any other pope couldn't hide and protect the number of wicked people Francis has if not for the media coverage." Enzoli, Barros, Zanchetta, Rupnik, McCarrick, etc. This comment, which garnered significant engagement from other users, summarized the viewpoint of many conservative Catholics who felt Francis had been shielded from proper scrutiny by a sympathetic secular media. Other Reddit users offered more pessimistic assessments of Francis's long-term legacy. One user identified as a survivor with a PhD commented, "I fear our current pope won't be remembered by the faithful in the future." This prediction about Francis's historical standing revealed the perception among some Catholics that his papacy would be harshly judged by future generations, with an unfavorable comparison to his more traditionally minded predecessors. Meanwhile, some users viewed the accusations against Francis as politically motivated efforts to undermine his reforms. A Reddit user named Stag Lee clearly questioned the allegations that Francis had covered up abuse, writing, "But the moment Francis said, 'Okay, no, seriously, enough, we're not hiding anymore.'" This archbishop appears unexpectedly. The contrasting reactions to Pope Francis have spread to how he handled specific scandals, with each new revelation or response becoming a battleground for competing visions of the Church. Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, became a vocal critic of Francis's leadership and doctrinal stance to the point where he was removed in 2023. An extreme and exceedingly rare measure that shows just how tense the relationship between Francis and his conservative critics had become. Strickland had repeatedly used social media to criticize Francis's stance, particularly on blessing same-sex couples, describing the Pope as betraying true Catholic doctrine in favor of secular values. Even as Francis worked to address major scandals like the financial corruption of Betu and the dissolution of Sodalitium Christi Vitae, which was rife with abuse, each action sparked fresh controversy between his critics and defenders. Supporters of Francis saw a pope courageously confronting deep-seated corruption and abuse despite fierce internal resistance, highlighting his unprecedented willingness to prosecute a cardinal and disband a compromised religious order. However, critics noted inconsistency, bias, and reluctance to hold certain allies accountable, pointing to delays in addressing the Rupnik case and initial defense of Chilean Bishop Barros. A Vatican official, speaking anonymously, was quoted by religious issues journalist John Allen saying, "Francis wants transparency, but only on his terms." He'll expose enemies and protect friends, just like any politician. This perception, whether fair or not, has significantly damaged Francis's reputation as a reformer and allowed critics to accuse him of hypocrisy and applying accountability selectively. Critics pointed to his 2023 comments, urging Vatican auditors to balance transparency with merciful caution in handling corruption, as evidence of an inconsistent approach that undermined real reform efforts. In the final years of his papacy, Francis seemed to increasingly accept this challenge. From 2021 to 2023, he committed to synodality, a global consultation process designed to make the Church more inclusive and participatory, representing an effort to shift from a monarchical leadership model to a more collaborative approach. As Francis's health weakened and opposition to his leadership grew, Vatican observers increasingly questioned what would happen after his papacy ended. Would his reforms endure, or would they be swiftly undone by a conservative successor? And perhaps most importantly, how would the Church address the deep divisions that had emerged during his papacy? These questions would soon become urgent as events unfolded rapidly in the spring of 2025. The death of Pope Francis changed the future of the Vatican. As the morning light streamed through the windows of the Apostolic Palace on April 21, 2025, Vatican officials received the shocking news that would forever change the course of Catholic history. Pope Francis passed away at the age of 88. The announcement came from the Vatican press office with deep sadness, noting that at 7:35 a.m. that morning, the Bishop of Rome had returned to his father's house. The death of Francis marked the end of a papacy defined by bold reform efforts, global support for the marginalized, and persistent scandals that challenged both his leadership capacity and the Church's credibility. In the hours and days that followed, both Catholics and non-Catholics reflected on his complex legacy. A pope who supported mercy and simplicity while struggling to address the institutional failures that eroded trust in the Church he led. The final years of Pope Francis's papacy were marked by declining health and increasing frailty. In March 2025, just weeks before his death, the Pope was hospitalized for pneumonia, raising concerns about his ability to continue leading the Church. From his hospital bed, he sent out a message, thanking the faithful for their prayers and support. His voice was noticeably weaker, but his spirit remained undiminished. Even in his final Easter message, conveyed by a supporter due to his frailty, Pope Francis still focused on global conflicts and human suffering, showing his commitment to addressing broader social justice issues even as his body weakened. With the death of Francis, the Catholic Church entered a phase known as sede vacante, or the vacant see, a period of transition and uncertainty as the College of Cardinals prepared to elect his successor. The upcoming conclave will shape the direction of the Church for years to come, with significant implications for ongoing reform efforts, scandal management, and the global Catholic community of 137 billion members. Several key concerns have dominated discussions about the future of the Church as Vatican observers and Catholic faithful reflect on what will happen next. The most pressing question centers on whether the next pope will continue Francis's progressive reforms or chart a more conservative course. While Francis appointed the majority of the cardinal electors, indicating his influence will extend beyond his death, the secretive nature of conclave discussions makes the outcome unpredictable, leaving many wondering whether his reform agenda will survive. Equally important is how the next pope will handle the lingering scandals that have plagued the Church. The Betu conviction and the ongoing Rupnik case will need continued attention, while broader issues of financial transparency and abuse prevention remain unresolved despite Francis's efforts. The new pope will need to demonstrate both a commitment to accountability and institutional reform skills to restore trust among the faithful. Many within the Vatican worry whether the next pope will be able to heal the rifts that have grown during Francis's papacy. The polarization between progressive and traditional Catholics has reached unprecedented levels, threatening the unity and effectiveness of the Church at a time when religious influence has waned in many parts of the world. Bridging the divide between these factions will require extraordinary diplomatic skills. Francis's potential success has strong candidates, each representing different visions for the future of the Church. The age and health of potential candidates will be significant considerations given Francis's experience. He was 76 when elected and served until the age of 88, facing health challenges that limited his activities in his later years. Many cardinals have privately expressed concerns about electing another elderly pope, potentially favoring a younger figure like Cardinal Tagle, who could bring greater stability and long-term leadership. However, others argue that an older transitional figure might be preferred to allow time for the Church to address Francis's reforms before making further significant changes. Regardless of the choice made, the hope remains that it will bring unity, wisdom, and strength to the Catholic Church and to the world it continues to influence. Thank you for watching this video. If you found the story interesting, don't forget to hit like, share this video with your friends and those around you so everyone can know. Leave your comment below and make sure you don't miss out on other exciting videos. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next exciting video. See you in the next videos.